Hello, everyone. Welcome to our workshop. Super excited to be here at GatsbyConf with all of you. See a few of you guys trickling in here, hopping in. Hopefully all the other panels, conversations today were good. Quickly going to give another minute or so for folks to get in here. And then we will dive in. We do have a bit of a change, just so you guys are aware. Our CEO, Nicolas from Webstacks here, fell a little bit under the weather. So we are shifting a bit of today's conversation to be more focused around the divide between marketing and development. And now we're involving design as well. And we have Nick, our head of design here, who's going to be speaking to some of those aspects. And we'll definitely make this a little bit more conversational for today's workshop.
Sweet. Nice to meet you all. Been at Webstacks for about the past year and excited to chat with you all.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we'll kind of just dive in here, kick things off. Again, my name's Jesse. I'm our head of growth here at Webstacks, Nick, head of design. Webstacks, for some background, we are a agency that specializes in helping software companies start, grow, and manage their website operations. We focus specifically on treating websites as a product. And we really try to focus on bridging the divide between marketing and development teams, which are often commonly siloed from each other. And there's often a lot of friction there. I'm sure we have a combination of marketers, developers here in the chat, and you guys maybe know what I'm talking about. It's not always the happiest of marriages. And what we want to talk about today is how it can be, and how teams from marketing, design, and development all working together in lockstep can help improve overall experiences and products that are created on a website. Some of the immediate kind of issues that we've identified, and what was identified early on here at Webstacks as a solution for us or problem for us to solve for, is really that gap. Identifying that developers oftentimes are completely isolated and frankly don't care so much about the marketing website. Their focus is on the product and improving products, and not so much on taking a request in from a marketer to change an image on a landing page or make an adjustment to a header. Having that type of relationship creates a lot of friction. It makes things really difficult for folks. When we identified this as a problem, we figured, how can we get developers excited about marketing, and how can we get marketers to work better with developers? Knowing that if that relationship is mended, that the organization, the team at large, is able to succeed well beyond than these two teams kind of paddling in separate directions. What we identified is something that actually was kind of studied or has been mentioned in the past, which is that folks that are utilizing a CMS or attempting to utilize a CMS are kind of having this battle of control. Does development own it? Does marketing own it? Where does it kind of fall? Oftentimes what happens, development owns it, but marketing tries to run it. And this is what creates that friction. It's what creates that difficult relationship. When you're able to instead join these teams together and empower them to work together, you're able to unsilo these groups and instead create a single team. And the way that we kind of address this problem and that we see as being a solution is really kind of twofold. One of the ways being that the business alignment between both teams needs to be clearly defined. Having a key objective that both parties or all parties can effectively work towards achieving together. Again, with teams that are often siloed or isolated from each other, development is unaware of the point of the asks that marketing is giving to them, and marketing often is overlooking the level of effort that is involved in executing the work that needs to be done. The irony is that both teams complement each other in such a way that working together helps balance things out. Having this clear business alignment between both teams is an obvious way for the groups to start working together. The other way that we see is keeping customer experience at the highest priority. This is where both of these teams clearly align together. Having your marketing teams and your sales teams, your customer success teams aligned with the types of experiences that developers are able to produce allows for teams to more easily collaborate together and ensure that the experience is one that everyone wants to have. From the development standpoint, they can weigh in and provide solutions that otherwise would not be offered or thought of from a marketer because the technical acumen is missing oftentimes to accomplish some of the things that we want to get done. Bringing both of these things together is really where you start to see the most kind of innovative things happen. It's also what helps improve things like speed to market for organizations. So pulling together these teams when you're focused around a key objective and when you're identifying that the customer experience is at the center of both teams' key objectives and key strategies is what allows for that alignment immediately. So what we kind of want to talk about here today is addressing some of those problems that come up. We want to identify some examples of things, and we have some examples of our own, but we definitely would love to encourage you guys to share any thoughts, ideas around maybe times that you have seen issues or successes between marketing and development teams working together. And we really want everyone to kind of walk away feeling like both teams from marketing and development standpoints are able to work together collaboratively, and that's better for business as a whole. So when it comes to approaching these types of things out of the gate, one kind of example that often comes up that like we've seen before is forms. So I'm sure many of you guys have a marketing automation system, HubSpot, Pardot, Marketo, these types of things that are owned by marketing. When a marketer is putting together a form for a landing page or for their website, they're oftentimes thinking about what the actual cost of acquiring that new lead is, what the actual work is going to be for if that lead doesn't actually convert. So identifying that a form being live and on the site and functioning and collecting information is being so valuable is obvious to the marketer. To the developer that's actually implementing it, it's very easy to just be a thing that's being added to the website. And so what we identify is that by bringing a developer in early and bringing in your design resources in early allows for better alignment on something like a form being added to a site. So when you're able to bring together the team members around something like creating a new form, you're able to understand the importance behind it. A developer is able to see that the cost of a form going down is detrimental to the company from a revenue standpoint. It's also creating a poor user experience. When creating these types of things, conversations can be had, especially around how that data is captured, where it's going, and why it's important to be there. Again, without that context, it's easier for an engineer to look at something as just another ask. And so we really see delivering on the why behind requests coming from marketing is what helps allow for a more productive relationship between both of the teams. Another way that we see these things often come up, I'm sure many of you guys have seen marketers attempt to create or start with templates. Oftentimes it's where like your head goes for creating these types of things. In order to create things at scale though, you have to have a plan of attack. It's really easy for marketing to come into a scenario where you're creating pages that are fixed only to that page. And it's unlikely or not really a scalable solution addressing pages one by one on a website than it is treating aspects of a website as something that can be reused. Ultimately, those are the types of things that marketers really want. Without a plan or a way to accurately articulate those things to teams on development, design, marketers are missing out on an opportunity to move faster in the long run and scale the aspects of the website so that they have more ownership of it for sake of attempting to get something out immediately. And this creates a lot of friction within the teams and creates a lot of issues, usually in order to actually scale the work that's being done. I want to like loop in Nick here a little bit too as well. I know I've been trying to frame the conversation that we're going to have, but Nick, I'm curious, when you're working with marketing teams and you're talking about getting pages on, how does it best work for you in getting looped into these conversations from a design perspective to get the right pieces of a page put together?
Yeah, I think it's totally important to first mention that the most important thing to discuss with all the teams is really what problem are we trying to solve? How can we build this in a way that we can solve that problem right now, but also solve the same problem a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 5 years from now? And that goes into, is the problem that people just want to improve on their funnels? Do we need to look at this from a UX perspective and just make small improvements to the components that they already have? Are we trying to reduce frictions in like page loads of repeatable content? I'm thinking like one company may have 1,000 blog posts and there's only one problem. Can we improve that template immediately and kind of improve things at scale and kind of solve that problem immediately? And then the last part would be, are we creating templates that are scalable over time? Do we need to separate this into small chunks that are extremely repeatable, or that have the bandwidth to change as needed for split testing purposes or for different purposes altogether? So how design takes that problem from marketers is we design in a way called atomic design. I'm sure everybody has at least heard of atomic design before. I can share my screen really quick on how Webstacks solves that problem right away. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Awesome. There you go.
Sweet. So how we do that is with atomic design. We start defining things at the smallest level possible. I'm sure from your 7th grade science class, you've all heard of like atoms, molecules. They make crazy things like animals, tables, I don't know. But how we do that in a website perspective is we define the smallest chunks possible that we can work with as designers and developers as atoms. How we do that is through colors, through typography, through simple things like shadows or grids and spacing that we use. And we create everything that we possibly can for every scenario possible with these smallest pieces. So we start with colors.
I don't think people can see.
Is it not viewable?
Oh, never mind.
Oh, looks like we're good. So we start with colors, and you'll probably see that we've got a lot of colors for this client in particular, and that there's every possible shade. And this is because we not only want to give them flexibility to create the page that they want, but we also want to make sure everything is accessible. We don't want anybody dinged by Google for accessibility. That'd be the worst. We don't want people to be stuck with a certain color palette that feels really constraining if they're trying to solve a different problem that needs to feel like a little bit lighter or a little bit darker. We want to really account for any mood that somebody would want to build. And through this, we build classes within Figma that would match the classes within development. So it would be a simple call like Gray 400 is a class that's within the code base. It's primary 700. It would be their main color usually. And through that, we would build things called molecules. But some other things that go under the atom sphere would be typography. We make multiple classes that would solve any problem needed. So saying that at small sizes, we would need like a medium typeface instead of a semi-bold because it's more information based, or we would need an extra bold for a heading because we want it to be loud and proud of whatever message that they're wanting to portray. So we account for every single class that we could possibly need right in the beginning. And if we need to make any changes later on, it's built within a class and would update throughout the entire document for both in the Figma design side and the development process as well. Like I said before, there in the atoms, there is also grids and spacing. We usually use the same grid a lot of the time, so we know how to replicate the process again for people if we need to, but we're also flexible on that if we want to go into a different style, depending on which kind of website they want to build, and things like shadow as well.
And the reason why defining out each of these elements within the actual pages that you're going to build, which you can do on any site. The examples Nick is sharing here, this is our process for approaching these types of things. But seeing them on the site, any website, you can look at it objectively for the most part, and you can identify areas of a website that can be broken up into different aspects, especially when it comes to, for example, a B2B software website. You're going to see sections like testimonials. You're going to see those aspects that come up. That's something that's easy to pull apart. And when it comes to marketing, oftentimes we're thinking of a page as a whole, and we're thinking of one page for one use. And when you break these things down, you can start to see the components of a page, all of the different aspects of a page as something that can be utilized in multiple places. That's what allows for that brand consistency. It's what ultimately also allows for a marketer to create and build the types of pages that they want a lot quicker than they would otherwise if they're locked in and only have one template for one use.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's always important to keep that as your main scope when you think about building a design system, is that you really want to be replicatable across multiple different mediums and move forward with that. So all of these atoms and molecules are more of like buttons and things like that. Inputs would build into a component. I'm thinking your global navigation, your footer, everything that would need to be built to make a landing page. But here's where kind of the meat comes in of how we're paying attention. Of how we pay attention to marketers. Like I said before, there is a lot of problems that come up that need to be solved, and a lot of it comes from the need to split test against a previous model of your landing page. How we account for that is we would want to build components that are super powerful and have multiple options for the content editors to bring up. So I'm thinking that you may want an email capture in some scenarios. You may want just a double CTA. You want simple things like testimonials. You want trust bars, and the list can go on. And what we're ultimately trying to do for content editors is give them the power to build the landing pages that they really want and solve that problem that they're wanting to solve. So that's a quick overview of how design moves in with marketing and development.
And this also creates the design system up. This also ultimately helps everyone speak the same language. When we're talking about the relationship between marketers, developers, it's really hard for a marketer to go to a developer and ask for an update, ask for a change, and do it in a way that articulates what they actually want. Most of the time, this is an area of friction where it's easy for things to get lost in translation or for miscommunications to happen. And this is exactly where design, sitting between both of these parties, allows for everyone to speak the same language. If I want to go and make a change to a grid component, I can use that language when I'm speaking about it, and immediately anyone from my design development teams my marketing teams knows exactly what I'm talking about. We're able to identify specific areas of pages that we want to change rather than treating everything as a whole. And so what we're really developing with these types of design systems is a language that unifies across each of these typically siloed departments. So by creating this type of language, you're ultimately codifying what you're going to be seeing on the website. You're creating a system for how someone is viewing things, but more than anything, you're allowing for teams that previously had a difficult time communicating with each other to seamlessly articulate in the same language. Having this type of relationship dramatically increases speed to market and improves the buy-in that you get from each of these teams. Because now when we're ultimately looking to work towards something, our North Star is aligned. There's no task-based ask that's coming in. And it's not just from a development standpoint, oh, it's here's another task that I got to take care of. Here's another task I got to bite off and do, but rather it's I'm making this change to this component because I know the business impact that it has.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't say it better.
So Nick, like when you're thinking about the design system, I know you just broke everything down, but within the actual design system, when you have this type of documentation from a development standpoint, can you speak to how that improves the work that they're doing once you're actually putting these things into production?
Yeah, so once we define things like this, the components that we want to build, it's extremely simple to modify based on needs from the marketers. So if we're wanting to create more variations of any component, we can do that very quickly by adding on components we already have. If a problem comes up where it's like, hey, we need to change the brand a little bit, we need to change a color from purple to blue because a rebrand happened, we can do that immediately now because every class is attached to every reference across the entire site. So changes can happen rapidly if needed, and it ultimately gives marketers the power, and just all the team can rally behind one simple goal of helping the marketers solve the problems that they need to solve.
Awesome. The aspect too around this as well that you touched on there, Nick, I think it's so important, but the documentation that this ultimately provides for the teams as that reference point and for changes being tracked. It's one thing to oftentimes marketer might say, I want to change, the background color of this hero. And there's no documentation of that. It's just that's now the new background of that hero, right? And there's no reference point for that. And I've been there myself before where, you have a discussion then a few days later, a few weeks later, where you're like, hey, I can't change back, the way that this was set up. And the developer's like, well, you just asked to change the color. We changed the color, right? And so that being able to have this type of documentation allows for scalability of the website as it grows, but it also allows for innovation to occur. So as I mentioned at the top, we focus on websites as being something that are never done. They're a product. You're always creating new content forever. Into the future, there's going to be content that doesn't exist today that we're using on websites that's going to be. And in order for you to see how far you've come, having a reference point like this allows for you to reflect back and be able to see, the progress that has been made and use that as comparisons for inspiration in the future. I see a couple questions coming in as well. And before we move on to another example, I'll take it to the top. Somebody asked, what is the nicest way of asking developers for an update or pulse check? It sounds like somebody maybe had a bad experience before. I'm curious, Nick, to get your thoughts. Being kind of in the middle, what are ways that you find yourself collaborating with developers that you've seen successful? Yeah,
I mostly always go back to, I ask pretty bluntly sometimes, but I also ask, how can I help the easiest way? I think a lot of the problems that we are trying to solve often have a simple solution. So I always try to say, how can I help us get there in the end? Like, is my documentation clean enough for you? Like, one thing we always try to do at Webstacks is we don't consider our designs ever done until we've provided thorough documentation explaining exactly what problem we're trying to solve and how we're doing that and what technical specifications we need. So the simplest way to ask where they are is, where are you at? How can I help? Like, I feel like that's the only way to go.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. From a like marketing perspective as well, a lot of times it's that like feeling of helplessness because you're basically putting in an ask. I think one of the like best ways for addressing progress on these types of things is being really proactive from the beginning, setting up what type of ask you even are creating to begin with, and defining a project brief, having a way to reference back. Kind of like what Nick said, that's really where a marketer can contribute to these types of asks. Identifying like what the problem is, what's the user story, and having a way to articulate what the expected impact could be, if that's possible. What is ultimately the outcome? What's the result that we're looking to accomplish here? Again, this helps create that enthusiasm between the two departments, but it really sets the why. And developers are missing that level of purposefulness in just getting asked to do something. Getting set. Here's my question. Here's my ask for something like this. It's not realistic for someone to just be excited about just fixing things all the time, right? But if you feel like there's a business impact that's being made, now you're excited by what this is. And so spending the time up front for marketers is super important. And I know we want to move really quickly. Most of the time, these are things that like pop up in the moment, but we have to be realistic about the ask that we have and what is a reasonable MVP that we can feel confident with based off of that ask. We may want all the animations of the world. We may want to have like the craziest looking design in the world because we're seeing Stripe or some massive other company do it, and we say, let's do that same thing. Sometimes it's just about identifying what's the MVP that gets us there, and then how can we have a fast follow-up that allows us to iterate.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Another question came up, what's the turnaround time for a design system for a 50-page website, or the one you covered with Privy? I think Nick hit pretty much the nail on the head here. The design system is never done. The starting point is really like, what are the reusable components that exist among the current pages? What are the aspects that we currently are dealing with that we can start with? And this kind of speaks to what I was just mentioning from the marketing perspective as well. If we try to reach perfection, we're constantly going to be chasing our tail. And what we need to, as marketers, do a better job of is taking action and having that bias towards action sooner. And the best way to do that is by starting with, what are the components that exist that we can break down? How can we break down to the least amount of components that give us the greatest amount of variation on a website? So Nick had broken down some of those hero sections or hero components that would typically exist. There's so many different variations that could exist of that. But what are the ones that we want to be able to launch with today? And what are the ones that we can start to reuse across pages, not just on our homepage or some of our inner pages like solutions or features pages, but what are things that we can use on landing pages? And how can we add that adaptation in now, right? Once those things are defined and you have that baseline, projects ultimately can start to grow and expand from there. But it's really, really easy for a relatively straightforward project to turn into a Frankenstein when you're having to try and think of every possible scenario before you press go.
Yeah, I think it's important too to define how many of those pages are forms of rich content too, and how custom is each page that they want to be. But yeah, it can be pretty quick sometimes to make a design system. We've been modifying for the past year of how we can create the best starting point for every client. And design systems for us now can take as little as a week for a full website. It could take longer depending on how large the site is. But it really depends on the starting point that we have created, and that is rapidly getting shorter and shorter because we are just solidifying our process right now.
Totally. Yeah.
Just to give some actual meat to you guys.
and you want that, right? Like, yeah, you want that consistency across the board.
Yeah.
Another question that came up, this is an extension of the first question, but on the other hand, what's the nicest way of asking designers for an update? I imagine something like, can you just change the color isn't the most ideal way.
Yeah, I mean, for me, just gotta ask, you know, where are we at? How can I help? I think that's the most effective way to get communication between the teams is really just to be straightforward and ask where they are and be as kind as you can, offer to help. But it's always more effective just to be as straightforward as possible, in my opinion. Just ask.
I think it's so easy for team members to forget that everyone's on the same team.
Yeah.
I should say, like departments, right? Like there's like often team camaraderie that exists within departments. And as I mentioned before, these are often siloed from each other. When you get buy-in from your team members and everyone is kind of marching towards that same goal, asking for updates on things is easy. Getting to be more collaborative, that's the part that I often try and seek more times than not. Looking for like, how can I get an update on this is very transactional. It can feel super transactional for someone you don't have a relationship with. If there's anyone here that's in an agency like us, we even articulate this to our partners, to our clients. When somebody is just like jamming down, what's the update? Where's this at? You know, you start to have a sense of friction for something like that. The relationship itself is it's not really transaction, or is very transactional, versus when you can actually have conversation with somebody to understand, hey, if this is going to take longer than our timeline, what are some things that we could maybe adjust to get us to launch, and how can we best follow up from here to ensure that we get to what we wanted in the first place? And sometimes it's being flexible with what your asks are, because there are things that sometimes pop up along the way, and that's okay. But if we have a defeatist attitude and we look at that as like, well, we didn't need it, so then it's all scrapped, it becomes really, really hard to want to be able to find solutions together in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. If it's a problem that's big and you want to launch something awesome and huge, sometimes it's okay to make a scooter model first and see what works as an MVP, move up from there.
I think this is a good question for you, Nick. Do you typically start atomic design system with every client, or do we have like a template that's modified within?
Yeah, that's a fun question, because at the beginning of Webstacks, we had no templates. We made them from scratch every time. But over time, we figured out that we can kind of cut some like time a little bit if we create a template, obviously. And the power of atomic design really works in our favor in that way. So if we have a template that we create that the classes are all hooked up to buttons and inputs and some scratch components that we know we're going to reuse over time, all we'll have to do is change those color classes and type, and we have a great base to start off of. So yes, we are starting to start off with templates for a design system, but not necessarily building a landing page or anything like that, because we do want to cater towards the client's needs specifically. So we start off with the template for now, but I don't think we will ever start off with a full website template, if that makes sense.
It's interesting too, like dealing with an atomic design system when one may already exist on, especially a product side. When those scenarios come up, Nick, how do you deal with it, and how are our teams dealing with it? Great to hear that.
Sorry, can you rephrase the question?
Like when a design system may exist already and you're looking to adapt on it,
sure.
Or potentially, potentially even start over. Is it really you're just, hey, we're at ground zero, or how can you kind of find ways to use what may already exist and adapt on it in a way that doesn't create an overload for development, potentially having to scrap everything on site?
Yeah, totally. So if we're receiving a design system from a client, we usually have like a little bit of a quality assurance check first, where is every color going to provide enough contrast, things like that. Are the input fields, are they making sense? Like, do we need to start over from there? Maybe we do, probably we don't, but we always go through this QA period just to level set right in the beginning. We also have some standards that we want to pay attention to at Webstacks. Are we including every color class that we'll possibly need over time? We probably will need to make these classes either way because we want to have the flexibility. Like I said, we want to have like the most scalable website possible. So we might as well just define everything we possibly can right in the beginning for the problem that needs to be solved for the foreseeable future, because at this point we can kind of guess what problems we're going to run into over time. And this goes into typography as well. Is type too small and we're start getting dinged, or is type too large? Are we not following like a type system that even makes sense? Or obviously I'm a designer, I want it to look good too. But to answer that, like absolutely we go through a QA check of everything. We've got our own standards that we want to pay attention to. We have developers that follow the design system as well. So we'll probably be kind of morphing it into our process over time, but obviously we want to work with the brand that already exists. So hope that answers your question.
So somebody asked too, whether our agency builds out design systems only in Figma, or if we use other more advanced things like Storybook. This actually like goes back, like the design systems that are in Figma, they're actually intended to match directly to React components that we would build in something like Storybook. This allows for that handoff between design and development to be a lot more seamless. Nick, you can probably speak to this a bit further too as well.
Yeah, so we want to design in the same way every time so we can make those React components, just because we're creating a streamlined process, because at Webstacks we love to move fast and create websites super quickly. So yeah.
I missed one in here too. Somebody asked how we can kind of like level set or push back with the designer who's adding to project scope or complexity. So looking at it from a development standpoint, saying that they would love to know how to communicate with their designer better.
Yeah, as I think the most effective way to kind of add to scope for a designer is really just to mention the problem that we're trying to solve. Like, hey, right now, the direction we're heading, I don't think is solving the problem as greatly as we possibly can. And it's so easy to rally behind a problem, like a mindset of just improving the world pretty much through like solving people's problems. And if we could all just rally behind together that we're all just trying to make lives simpler, then I think it's very easy for us to add a little bit to the scope, as long as we're getting that project done.
Definitely, I think some Gene had mentioned in the chat having requirements for both design and dev. I think that's kind of part of the process as well, like knowing your team's strengths, weaknesses, right? For any sports fans, things like that, you can't have a team of all of the exact same player. You have to, have people that are contributing in their own way, and it's a push-pull oftentimes. From the marketing perspective, hopping in and being able to handle complexity oftentimes is a little bit more difficult because, frankly, like we want things, we want it now, we want to be able to make these changes, but it does go back to those requirements, right? And how can we define what gets us at least a step closer today or on the timeline that we're setting versus not doing it at all and creating a block or putting up a guard that allows for innovation in the future. We constantly want to make sure that if we're going to be asking for things, we're okay with getting closer to what we want in the long run, but being realistic about what our asks are from our other team members from a design and development standpoint.
Absolutely.
We've got about 15 more minutes here. Appreciate all the questions coming in from everyone. Want to keep encouraging you guys, sharing more questions, asking some of these things. They're really helpful. I do want to share another kind of aspect that oftentimes comes comes up from a marketing perspective when it comes to making a request. And this is geared more towards SEO. This is perfect for Gatsby actually in particular. Something that oftentimes may come up in conversations around building a website is making sure that that site is optimized for search. And when you have, again, silos between your development teams, your marketing teams, it's really, really easy for requests to come in blindly from teams like SEO, where they're asking for updates or they're flagging all of these issues that may exist when in reality, they aren't really issues at all, or there may be a very good reason why something is set up in this way. An example that we often kind of point to is if you use Google page speed to get a lighthouse score and you run YouTube through it, the score that you're going to get back is incredibly low. It's going to be around 30. It's going to flag all of these issues, but it's because you're missing the context of the ask here and the purpose behind it. And someone on an SEO team may be barking at someone from their development team to fix all these things, make all these changes, when in reality, the context is missing completely. So not having a completely objective view, siloed, is oftentimes something that creates more friction and creates more chaos than when you're bringing in someone from development, someone that's more technical, that's able to identify or share the context behind what the ask is. Like, what's the purpose that we're trying to get at with these types of things?
Absolutely.
Somebody asked how we deal with uncompromising designers on the client side. I'll let you take that.
Wow. What a fun question. Yeah, totally run into this scenario sometimes. I think it's all about being human with that person. What's the effect of if a compromise isn't made? Like, is it something as simple as a color not providing contrast? Okay, explain, like, all right, our website will get probably dinged or something like that. It's all about cause and effect. It's almost, I always deal with like ultimatums of just being like, hey, is this the most effective solution at the end of the day? Is it or is it not? Are we really solving a problem with this one thing that isn't compromising? At the end of the day, I think it is just being human and trying to level set with everybody. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. That's how I always go about it.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great point that you bring up, especially too, like when it comes to making changes. You're kind of speaking on like what that why is as well.
Yeah.
Like what's that context? I'm sure like all of us deal with these types of things before ourselves, but things like, what is the business impact this is going to have? Yeah. What is the level of effort that's going to be involved to get this done, and understanding how you can come to a compromise on those things. This happens like oftentimes too with I know I used SEO before as an example. Running crawls on your website every single day is going to drive you mad trying to fix everything. You're constantly going to be plugging holes with your thumb. At the end of the day, when you can be realistic around, hey, our website's ever growing, ever changing. We've got lots of cooks in the kitchen. We're testing things. We're trying new things. There's going to be things that have an error, have a flag. And if we're so concerned on being perfect on those things, then we're never going to get to innovate in the ways that actually are going to help us advance. We're constantly going to be stifling our kind of creative growth because we're going to be so focused on all of these issues that really are minor, right? And doing these types of audits on a consistent basis, be a monthly, bi-monthly basis, allows for more sweeping changes to be addressed without necessarily completely, crippling the day-to-day work that could be done focused elsewhere. So it's kind of finding that fine line between these types of things.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'll throw out a question for everyone, and we can get some answers in live chat, but has there ever been a time, whether you're a developer, you're a marketer, you're a designer, but any times that you feel like reflecting back, you could have addressed a question or an ask differently with one of your other counterparts or other team members? I'll let everyone kind of like marinate on that while we kind of talk into something else. But if you did, we'd love to just get a sense, maybe thumbs up of if that's ever happened, and if this conversation has like helped illuminate any of that before. I'd like to share one more aspect here as well, and this kind of speaks to some of the design, some of the SEO things that we've talked about as well. But something that commonly comes up from SEO perspective is structured data, and how you can make the most use of adding structured data to your site from a search perspective, as well as ensuring that you aren't compromising on the actual designs on a particular page. These are things that like Google is going to search for and find to be really beneficial for your SEO standpoint. But oftentimes when marketers put in a request or ask for a request, it's interpreted in a way that is basically asking for an image or something like adding just the actual content itself, versus actually taking the steps towards adding structured data to a site, which is going to help your search. An example of this is having star ratings. So you'll see these things oftentimes on for different software reviews, things like Capterra, for example, G2. When you go to search for these types of things on a page, if you're asking to add 5 stars, for example, to a hero on your website, a designer or developer may just interpret that as, okay, let me grab an image of 5 stars and I'll throw it up there, and that's that. But when you can give the context of why does it matter? How does this actually fit within the page, and what is the best way to do these things? Not only are you helping provide context for the marketing benefit of adding these types of things, but you're also then giving the context for the ask itself. And that allows for a developer or designer to weigh in on potentially a better way to be doing the things that you're asking for, and how those things fit within the pages that you're creating together. I use this as an example because it comes up a lot for us. And it's one of those things where a marketer may think, oh, this is just an image that's being added, when in reality, it's not. It's more than that, that you're trying to add to the page. And this is the better way to do these types of things.
Yeah. It's so cool because you can add all of these great forms of structured data to so many things within a website. So I would even think like a blog page where you can add in like things like read time, author, when was the last time it was like edited, or when was it published. Like all you're trying to do is provide as much context for the user to get them the content that they're really searching for. And when you think about like, why is Google there? It feels like such a gift that we can provide that for users and provide all of that structured data, because ultimately what we're trying to do is solve problems for humans. And the fact that we can add that all in is just like awesome to me.
Definitely. Awesome. I know we're getting close to time here, so want to kind of wrap things up, tie it back to what we kind of talked about at the beginning. First of all, appreciate everyone being flexible with the change of topic here. Hopefully this was still really useful for everyone. Feel like this discussion was really important and is important. It's something that comes up really often with the clients that we're working with. I mean, frankly, this is at the core of our identity as an agency. This is what we've been built on, is helping kind of seek the solutions that help bridge the gap between these teams. We see this as something that's going to continue to grow and expand over time. Adaptations on teams on a client side, as well as an agency side. It's really difficult for marketers to bring developers onto their team, work with technical resources in a way that fits nice and neat within marketing. And what we say to that is, rather than trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, instead treat everyone with the respect and acknowledgement that they have to build their own teams and find out how you guys can complement each other together. Overall, being aligned on the same business objectives and being able to recognize that the customer experience, the user experience is at the core of both marketing, design, and development teams is at the identity of each of those individual groups, is that unifying factor. We hope that this discussion today helped illuminate some of those things for you all, and that this is something you can take back to your own organizations or your own teams and hopefully start to implement. I'd also be remiss if I didn't ask you to come check out Webstacks.com, see some of the things that we are doing. We're constantly writing about these types of topics and talking about these types of things. If you are interested in reading about it, writing about it, collaborating on these types of things, please reach out to us, join our newsletter, learn about some of the blogs that we are writing, and we'd love to keep this conversation going. We do feel like this is going to be the future of the way that people are handling their websites and how they're viewing it as an extension of the product. So thank you all for joining today.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.